Hi, this is Ryan Neal from the USA offices of Neal's Saddlery and Harness, Cowboy sewing machines, and high-tech sewing machines. We're going to continue our video series on the maintenance and operation and adjustment for the CB3200 sewing machine. This will be video 3 of our 3-part series, and what we're going to do in this particular video is we're going to show you all the lubrication points on the sewing machine. So I will have the camera pan forwards and backwards so that you can see a little bit more closely as far as the lubrication points on the machine. You can see the individual holes and so forth. So I'm going to have the camera pan in just a little bit closer now, and we're going to show you some of the lubrication points on the machine. The first place that I like to lubricate, we'll have the camera come in a little bit closer here so they can see this. The first place that I like to lubricate is where the flywheel touches the small bushing that's on the side of the casting right here. I usually like to put 1 or 2 drops of oil right here because that alleviates some of the friction. There is a bushing that's here, and then the flywheel rubs against that bushing, so I usually like to put a drop or 2 of oil right there. The other place that I like to lubricate, and most of the lubrication points on this machine are common sense. Anywhere where you see a red dot in the casting, that would be here, here, and then of course over here. Those would be good places to lubricate. Every once in a while too, it wouldn't hurt to take the front cover or the top cover off the sewing machine, and I'll have the camera come in just a little bit closer. There's a small lubrication point right here that's marked in red, and then you would want to go ahead and lubricate all the points that are in here on the cams as well as the bushings and so forth, where the shafts run through the bushings and so forth. It's usually a good idea to put a few drops of oil down in there. Now you can use, as far as oil, you can use either a Juki Defrix oil or Lily White sewing machine oil. You can also use gun oil on the rear of the sewing machine. It doesn't necessarily, any type of a good solid lubricating oil would work well. Usually for the front end of the sewing machine, we normally recommend that you stick with the Juki Defrix oil or the Lily White sewing machine oil, because it's supposed to be a non-staining paraffinic based oil that would wipe off with soap and water. For the back end of the sewing machine, you can either continue using sewing machine oil, or you can use a synthetic oil, or you can use, for instance, Ballistol or Rem oil, which is a fine quality gun oil as well. So I'm going to continue showing you the lubrication points on the machine. Again, you can lift this cover up and put a few drops of oil in here. Also, there's a cover right here. You can remove that cover, put a few drops of oil in there. It's good to have a spray bottle of oil when you're dealing with the back side of the sewing machine, because oftentimes you can't get a drop style oiler in there, so it's better to spray the parts. So again, you can use a Rem oil or Ballistol, anything in a spray. You can sometimes spray this the slot for the reverse lever inside the sewing machine as well. You can spray in there, and then of course you get good coverage for all the parts in there. So again, anywhere where you see a red dot in the casting is a great place to oil. That would be here, 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 here. And then of course there are some holes that are not marked. Putting a few drops of oil in those holes won't make that much of a difference, and you can go ahead and do that if you feel free, if you would like to as well. Also under here on the sewing machine, you can see that there's a red hole right here. That's a great place to add oil. Over here there is a small hole, and that's a good place to add oil. Also, where the needle plate is, you'll see that there's a small hole in the needle plate. That's a very good place to add oil as well. I'm going to have the camera come over to the back side of the sewing machine here so we can see some of the oil points on the back side of the machine. You'll see right here that there is a small red dot right here in a hole in the casting. That's a good place to put a few drops of oil. And you'll notice right here where this shaft collar hits against the journal that's on the casting, that's a good place to add oil. There's another place to add oil would be on this side, and again you can add a drop or 2 of oil here just to make sure that the shaft collar doesn't rub too hard against the journal that's on the casting. And then over here, there's a small hole right here in the banana adjuster for the alternating height of the walking feet. You can put a few drops of oil right there. I also like to put a couple of drops of oil right here, again where this collar meets against the bushing that's in the casting. And I like to put a few drops of oil here, and again here on this side where the shaft runs through the bushing. Also like to put a couple of drops of oil here on this side, and I also like to oil this hole here. And then in addition to that, of course, where this collar hits against the bushing right here, I like to put a few drops of oil there as well. I also like to oil this particular, the presser foot lifter apparatus on the back of the sewing machine. I like to put a few drops of oil here, and I like to put a few drops of oil here as well. I also like to, on this side of the presser foot lifting apparatus, I like to put a few drops of oil here. Also where the presser foot lifter touches against the casting right here, I like to put a few drops of oil as well. Now there are some lubrication points that are inside the sewing machine, and in order to access those points you have to remove the front cover. There's a screw on the upper right hand side of the cover and a screw on the lower left hand side of the cover. So in order to be able to access those points, we do have to remove the front cover on the sewing machine. Now when you remove the cover, you want to make sure that you hold on to the cover as you tighten the last screw. And the reason why, or as you remove the last screw, and the reason why you want to do that is because the cover will have a tendency to want to fall off. And so you don't want a 10-pound cast iron cover careening down to the floor. So you do want to make sure that when you remove the front cover, you want to hold on to it. So there are some additional lubrication points inside the sewing machine, and I'll have the camera come in a little bit closer so that we can see those. There's a spring that runs across the outside presser foot bar here. I like to lubricate that spring. I also like to lubricate up top here where the presser foot bar goes through the adjuster right here. I like to put a few drops of oil there. I also like to oil right here, which is where the rock frame meets the casting. I put a few drops of oil there. And then if you look very closely, you'll see that there's a small hole here, there's a small hole here, and there's a small hole underneath on the bell crank. And I like to put a few drops of oil in those holes as well. And that's usually helps this mechanism work a little bit better. I also like to put a few drops of oil where this wheel touches against this block, and then back in the casting here there's a square-shaped cutout where this block hits into the back of the casting. I like to put a few drops of oil back there as well. Also where the needle bar crank is, which is right back here, I like to put a few drops of oil there. As I turn the flywheel over on the sewing machine, you'll see also here that there's a small hole where the crank meets against the apparatus that spins it right up here, so I like to put a few drops of oil there as well. Then finally down here underneath the sewing machine, I like to put a few drops of oil here, here, and here, and that's where the outside presser foot bar, the inside presser foot bar, and the needle bar go through the casting. It's usually a good idea to put a few drops of oil there as well. Also, where the rock frame hits against this retainer bar right here, I like to put a few drops of oil there as well. And so because what happens is this rock frame, as you can see, it slides front to back, so I like to put a few drops of oil here to stop any excess wear. The final lubrication point on the sewing machine, and I save this for last because it's the most important part, is the bobbin case area on the sewing machine. And so what you want to do is you want to put a few drops of oil down here in the shuttle race area of the sewing machine, or in the bobbin case area. Then as the machine turns over, it'll cycle that oil around the shuttle race, giving it an even distribution of oil. And you want to do that fairly often. You probably want to do that about every second or third bobbin. Just put a couple drops of oil down in there. Then that way that keeps the shuttle hook running nice and smooth, and you don't have to worry about damaging the hook. The hooks on these machines are somewhat expensive. They're about $160 US, so you don't want to wear your hook out prematurely due to lack of lubrication. As far as a frequency to oil the sewing machine, it's generally a good idea that if it sits for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, or if it sits for a month and you don't run it, good idea to put a few drops of oil on everything. Generally what we recommend doing is oiling at the end of every day or the day before that you plan on using the sewing machine, and that way the excess oil will drip out of the sewing machine, and then you can just take a paper towel and wipe off the excess oil. Generally, where oil would tend to accumulate on the sewing machine after you oil it, it would accumulate underneath here where the presser foot bars meet against the casting, and then of course it tends to want to accumulate on the needle plate for the sewing machine as well. So you can just take a paper towel, wipe underneath here, wipe the needle plate, wipe down the presser feet in the morning before you start sewing. Another thing you can do is take a paper towel, fold it over 3 or 4 times, and then literally sew on the paper towel, and what that'll do is it'll keep the bottom of the presser feet dry as well as the needle plate, and then you can run a paper towel through it before you start to sew your leather. So that gives you a rough idea about the lubrication points on the sewing machine. And again, if you would have any questions on how to lubricate any of this stuff, or if you're not certain on how to do anything, please feel free to give us a call. One final thing that I would like to note is that when we go to put this front cover back on the sewing machine, of course you're going to want to do that after you lubricate the machine. You'll notice here that there's a small cutout that's in the finger that's used to split these discs apart. When you install the cover back on the sewing machine, you want to make sure that this cutout lines up with the nipple that's on the back of the sewing machine right here. And so what you do when you put the cover on is that you make sure that the nipple goes into the slot, and then you'll simply bolt the cover back on using the 2 screws. So that, just to make sure that when you do put the cover on, you definitely want to have that done, because otherwise the finger will not split the disc apart when the presser foot is lifted up. So anyhow, this is a rough guide, a little bit of a tutorial on the oiling for the Cowboy CB3200, and my name is Ryan Neal from the USA offices of Cowboy Sewing Machines, High-Tech Sewing Machines, and Neal's Saddlery and Harness. If you have any questions about the CB3200 machine, please feel free to give us a call. I can be reached at area code 330-692-1418, and I do thank you for your time today.